brain. And by which he meant, there's a process of political maturation that goes on as people get jobs and houses and mortgages and families and think about security and all those things. I think that is less true now of the millennials than it has been in previous generations, for a whole lot of reasons. And I think we need to do a radically better job of explaining the creative power of free markets and entrepreneurship and wealth creation to that generation, which frankly emerges from our school system with zero economic literacy. So that's a larger educational challenge that we have.
All right, we're going to go to Ozzy, the back, next.
Hi Jason, thank you very much for this opportunity today. I'm a lawyer by profession. I deal with refugee law a great deal. And I think you did a tremendous job in your government, being an immigration minister, by streamlining the refugee system. Now 3 months, they're in and out. That's a great way of making sure that new Canadians who are valuable to the system and people who are actually persecuted get the opportunity to be a part of this great country and become a part of this machinery. And it has worked great. Perfect. I mean, bogus claims and claims that should not be taking place and should not be holding up our system are thrown out of the system sooner rather than later. Now, it's not a perfect system, but it's much better than people waiting 5 years to find out about their faith.
Which is what it used to be like.
Yes. Faith while their people are being persecuted where everyone else is being. I particularly belong to the Ahmadi Muslim community. I can vouch on behalf of the community that the Conservative government did raise some serious issues with the government where minorities were being persecuted. Now, one job that the Conservative government did not do well was the publicity. So if you, anywhere in your campaign you have that publicity guy, please do fire him right now, because that's going to cost you. What Liberal government was able to do was narrate fairy tales to people. Now we can see what's going on with their current promises being broken. My suggestion, personal suggestion to you is that please make sure that you communicate with people.
Yes.
Do explain them why people cannot take oath or citizenship tests with their faces covered. Right. It's not an attack on a religion, it's not an attack on anyone's identity. Right. It is important. Right. So how do you propose on doing that?
Thank you, Usman, for those comments. Usman comes from a persecuted minority community with whom I'm very close and appreciate his comments and good work. And you're absolutely right. I think the last federal Conservative government was very good on substance and very poor on communications, and that's ultimately why we lost. And I would like to say that I took a different approach on communications, which is why the reforms I led were pretty successful. No one thought you could walk on the third rail of Canadian politics, immigration policy, and make the kind of fundamental reforms you mentioned, and survive it. But I did, you know why? Because I believed that you have to communicate constantly. You have to communicate your motives. You have to communicate what's broken about the status quo and what the reforms look like. So on refugee reform that you've mentioned and other things, we would spend months pre-positioning the journalists about what was wrong with the system, and then we would give them endless technical briefings. I would stand up in the National Press Gallery in Ottawa and do like a 2-hour press conference until every possible question had been answered. Then I would go to Toronto and do, like literally, I think one day I did 40 exclusive back-to-back ethnic media interviews in Toronto over 2 consecutive days, did the same in Vancouver. We would have a truth squad rebutting myths on social media, etc. And that is why we were able to prosecute politically many of those very difficult reforms. But generally, our government didn't follow that. That is my approach. It is aggressive, proactive, assertive communications. And always lead with your motive. You know, in that case, our motive was to give faster protection to bona fide refugees by, in part by screening out the bogus claims much more quickly. And we did it. So, and you mentioned the face coverings. You know, I announced that policy as the minister. I'll admit it. I announced that policy as Minister of Citizenship in November of 2011. That people taking the citizenship oath in a public citizenship court in front of their fellow citizens, joining the Canadian family, should be able for at least 30 seconds to do so publicly, proudly, and openly. And I make no apologies for having made that decision. And I made that announcement, Usman, at a roundtable of Muslim women in Montreal who unanimously applauded the decision. And it was never a political problem for us when I was communicating that. Unfortunately, 4 years later, when it got into the crucible of the election because of a court decision, it got completely mishandled. So I'd like to believe that my record on these things demonstrate I have a little more sensitivity about how to communicate.
Okay, let's go with Greg.
I want to applaud you. All I want is great vision and leadership, and someone that speaks without a single note, and one Justin Trudeau pause. So you have 30 minutes, not one every 3 seconds. That's off. This is a little bit where we got to. I want your perspective, your take. Notwithstanding the precipitous collapse in oil prices, notwithstanding the NDP electoral success, what got the Conservative movement in Alberta here? What's your take on that history?
Boy.
30 seconds. Because what got us here won't get us there.
It's a whole combination of factors, part of which is just the accumulated weight of 4 years in office, which led to a party that became increasingly, I'll be blunt, arrogant and out of touch, and demonstrated a sense of entitlement. And I'm ready for the leadership of that party, but there's no point in beating around the bush here. And, so half of that party's base went and started their own political home. Now their perspective is that their party left them. But my point is simply this: we can have an interesting debate about what the causes were, and PCs will say, Wild Rosers, they're the cause of the division, and Wild Rosers will say to PCs, you left us, and there will be this fascinating debate, and there is one party that wins the debate. It's called the NDP. So I propose we leave that. We learn from the lessons of the past, including what happens when a party culture becomes characterized by cronyism and entitlement in areas. We learn from those lessons, but do not become mired in the past with endless recriminations and finger pointing, because that is a zero-sum game. I say we learn from those lessons, but move forward. And let the academics sort it out and write their papers in 20 years about what happened. Federally, if we were still arguing over the Reform PC split, the Liberals would have had a 30-year run in government. And I don't think that would be healthy for a democracy. So I'm saying arrogance, entitlement, cronyism, but learn from it, but move on.
Okay, all right, we're going to go with Kit, and then we're going to go with Tom.
Oh,
You saw me.
so, okay.
You saw my hand. She has a question.
Oh, I was trying to reach over into
All right,
the
Kim.
corner here.
Yeah.
So you started this whole process, I believe, in the spring, Jason, and I'm a PCer, and I
In July.
continue, pardon me?
In July.
July, okay, so I continue to hear from a lot of the party that I'm a PCer, that, we're status quo, we're strong, we're leading in the polls, and I think I'm hearing that the same is on the other side of the story. So how have things been progressing? Is the conversation changing?
Yes.
Where is the conversation changing? And what needs to happen for the transition to happen?
Great question. So when I started this, to be clear, when I launched my campaign July the 4th, the PC party was down to 6,000 members, 200 donors, teetering on bankruptcy, $1 million in debt, with very little money coming in, and at 20% in third place in the polls, with lasting brand damage. I'm pleased to see a recent poll, one recent poll, which had the PC party back up to the mid-30s and in the first position. Not at a majority government level, yeah, at this point, but what's happened between then, in the intervening 3.5 months? Well, the only thing we've been talking about in Alberta politics, apart from the NDP, is a proposal to unite, being led by somebody in the Progressive Conservative Party, and the same poll indicated 80% of PCs and Wild Rosers want one single united party. So the conclusion I draw is that the positive vision that we're presenting here is bringing some people back, but that's not satisfying to me. I'm not maintaining the division. I think a plausible case could be made that either Wild Rose or the PCs could win the next election. But as long as they're fighting with each other for the same scarce resources and votes, it's also a plausible scenario that the NDP wins the next election. And for me, that is intolerable. I ask people, what is your risk tolerance of a second NDP term and what would justify it? And I've yet to hear a good answer. So to answer your question though, I have found since July, since I started this, an incredible clear thawing of resistance within the PC party. Groups that I go and speak to in constituency associations across the province that were on the fence about this 3 or 4 months ago are now overwhelmingly supportive. And many people who were implacably hostile are now on the fence. So I find, I just find a growing support for this. That's anecdotal, but it's supported by the polling. I'll just close with this, in the strange rules they've adopted for the PC election, where half the delegates are super delegates, that includes every former MLA, of whom there are some 200. So I have to call all these folks, including Brian, they've done good public service, which we honor. And I have found that I thought that group would be more focused on continuity, the legacy, the brand. But I have found the opposite, that about 2/3 of the former PC MLAs are supportive of my message and plan. I think it's because they're living in the real world, not a political echo chamber. Many of them have business interests, they see the high stakes of the NDP, and they remember the Wildrose supporters, not as space aliens, but as their friends and former supporters. So for them, for many of them, it's just a natural reconstitution of the coalition that they had.
All right, let's do a quick reality check here. How many currently are card-carrying members, active card-carrying members of the provincial PC party? Actually have a membership. So it looks like we have about 20. How many are active card-carrying members of the Wildrose party? We have about 7 or 8.
I like the folks who put up their hands both times, I encourage that.
And how many actually have an active card-carrying member of the federal PC party?
Conservative Party.
Conservative party. All right, okay, interesting, okay. All right, we're gonna go to Tom, and then we're gonna go to Robert. Tom, you had a question?
How do you dispel the suspicions and the frustrations of PCers who voted NDPers before? And how do you get them back into the fold and regain their trust?
Great question. So my read of the last election is that the NDP successfully consolidated the roughly 1/3 of the vote that is, broadly speaking, left of center. The left-right-center thing has its limitations, but about 1/3 of Alberta voters vote for the federal or provincial Liberal or NDP or like Alberta parties. So roughly 1/3 are for bigger government, if you will. They consolidated that piece, and then they added about 10 additional points. And that came from traditional center-right or free enterprise voters who were casting what they thought was a risk-free protest vote. Take one case in point. Calgary, Acadia elected an NDP MLA last May with 33% of the vote. In October, in that area, I won 76% of the vote as a federal conservative. And the NDP vote went down to 9%. So it's not like a bunch of people in Calgary, Acadia woke up in May and suddenly decided they were socialists. They were casting a protest vote, and for them, I think the Wildrose Party had become tarnished as a protest vehicle because of the floor crossings. They wanted to send a message to the PCs, and they thought they could do so in a risk-free way because the NDP couldn't possibly win, especially not in Calgary, Acadia. It was impossible. So I think that's what happened. I think some of those people will come back naturally. But really, I think what they're telling us is the plan that I am proposing is to create a new vehicle, built on the legacy of the past, but a new party, and as much as possible with new people, new candidates, new ideas, and I think that novelty, that refresher, that new beginning, that fresh start, is what will attract back those traditional free enterprise protest voters.
Okay, we're gonna go to Robert, then we're going to David, and we're going to Dolores. Robert.
Thank you. Brian, thank you for hosting. Very generous and again, wonderful view. Just thank you for being on. Jason, thank you for your leadership